The Network of African National Human Rights Institutions, in collaboration with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the Office of the Human Commissioner for Human Rights, the National Human Rights Commission of the Gambia, today commenced the 5th National Human Rights Institutions Forum in the country. The theme of the forum is Trade and Human Rights in the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, inclusive implementation of the agreement with participation of vulnerable populations. In March 2018, the African heads of state and government adopted the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement in Kigali, Rwanda. The agreement came into force in May 2019 after several states in Africa had adopted and ratified the Trade Pact. The first transaction was carried out in January 2021, a flagship initiative aimed at smoothing intra-trade in Africa. However, there have been concerns of over-exclusive discussions leading to the adoption of the agreement. As negotiations commence on implementation of the Trade Pact, the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions has carried out a baseline assessment which identified various human rights concerns that must be considered during interstate or sub-regional deals towards implementation of the agreement. The network has developed guidelines on a human rights-based approach to the implementation of the agreement led by African National Human Rights Institutions. In this regard, the network briefed the media about their stand on the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Speaking at the press briefing, Dr. Elasto Mugwadi, chairperson of the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions, says their assessment revealed that no national human rights institution was involved in the negotiation towards the free trade agreement.
While adoption and ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area is a positive, progressive move towards achieving an integrated market on the continent for over 1.3 billion people, we are gravely concerned that national negotiations and implementation plans have continued to exclude key human rights actors. This exclusion was also noted during negotiations at the continental level. Businesses have been some of the greatest violators of human rights today, as you may be aware of. These important negotiations cannot and must not happen without reference to human rights. And a discussion on human rights cannot happen in the absence of national human rights institutions. Indeed, our report, the baseline assessment and stakeholder mapping of national human rights institutions and other actors' involvement in African Continental Free Trade Area processes, established that no NHRI was involved in the negotiations towards the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Dr. Mugwadi further informs the media that the exclusion of key actors will propagate and perpetuate impunity and make it hard to mainstream human rights into the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement.
While it is a state obligation to promote and protect human rights, tenets of good governance call for complementarity between and among state and non-state stakeholders. Conversely, national human rights institutions are the principal human rights agencies established and mandated to support the state in delivering on its human rights mandate of preservation of human rights. Failure, ladies and gentlemen, to accommodate the diversity from interested parties not only violates the human rights principle of non-discrimination and equality, but also raises suspicion of government and enterprises' intention to work in isolation under limited or no accountability. If untamed, the continued exclusion of other key actors will breed, propagate, and perpetuate impunity and make it hard to mainstream human rights into the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. This is against the integration spirit of this flagship project of the African Union Agenda 2063, a development blueprint that is bedrocked on human rights in its 7 aspirations.
Dr. Mugwadi says The network of African national human rights institutions and its partners calls for the inclusion of national human rights institutions and key actors.
It is on this basis that we, the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions and our partners, call upon national human rights institutions in collaboration with other public and private actors to conduct national impact assessments for evidence-based protection strategies and the value of mainstreaming human rights into implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. 2, to call upon states to open up negotiations to multi-stakeholders for diversity of input for enhanced protection. 3, states to establish national mechanisms in the form of special committees incorporating diverse interested parties led by NHRIs and the CSOs to monitor and report on implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. States to deliberately mainstream human rights into the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area through express clauses in the interstate negotiations.
The Network of African National Human Rights Institutions is a membership organization of 46 national human rights institutions in Africa. While zeroing on the impact of African Continental Free Trade Agreement on vulnerable groups, the forum's discussion will culminate in the adoption of a resolution which will be shared with the African Commission for consideration. The resolution will also point out practical ways of collaboration between national human rights institutions and other human rights actors in mainstreaming of human rights in the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Reporting for Kerr, Fatou, I am Landin Cisse.